Hi, I'm Danny Vidot. I'll be walking through a short summary of my paper for this course. So success in personal life and career is marked by a series of characteristics that are commonly shared with ethical approaches to leadership. These leadership characteristics co-vary with moderately higher levels of self-esteem, sociability, and assertiveness, along with lower levels of anxiety and increased levels of manifest traits that relate to something like achievement striving and longevity and socioeconomic status and career agency. The simultaneous and collaborative support of individual employee professional development and organizational vision brings various frames of organizations into alignment where less overhead is spent on negotiating internal conflicts that stem from the incongruence. Both individual development and organizational cultural transformation and support are necessary to realize the expected benefits of employee development, and it depends in part on the prevailing attitudes and values about development. So successful coaching, training, and mentorship can all help support individual growth. And research finds that supportive organizational climates with high psychological capital and high knowledge diffusion relate positively to employee outcomes. 3 ways professional development can support organizational vision are improving alignment and congruence through common purpose and trust, reducing team dysfunction through improved interpersonal skills, and potential increased execution efficiency through cross-functional training. So people engaged in activities that they find personally meaningful and relevant are imbued with a sense of purpose that increases individual productivity and also improves group morale. So clearly defined team goals and learning goals and metrics that are brought into increases team commitment and reduces the amount of management overhead that's spent on control and resolving conflicts that come up from misdirection. So pro-social interpersonal behaviors are found to improve employee and organizational performance, and teams that seek out integrative solutions to conflict are also positively impact the organizational outcomes. Cross-functional training allows organizations to be more efficient through reduced labor overhead. And there's some indication that employees that are cross-functionally competent may show more commitment and better solutions in negotiations. As technological developments increase the rate of globalization and social development, organizations will need leaders that can leverage their cognitive abilities and empathy and self-awareness and cultural sensitivity and behavioral flexibility and systems level thinking and the ability to learn from experience and adapt to change. Generally, the effective communication strives to provide a sense of clear mutual understanding between the persons involved. Carl Rogers, one of the great psychotherapists, described a reflective listening technique that improves mutual understanding. In the leadership effectiveness literature, there's an apparent cross-cultural consensus on the preferred characteristics of interpersonal managerial competencies. So some of these include assertiveness and confidence and fearlessness and this clarity of thought and focus. However, there is some domain-specific variation in particular in the aspects of compassion and politeness. And there's some indication that higher manifest levels of these traits may yield positive longer-term outcomes, while lower levels of these traits might be better for something like leadership emergence. So also the careful formulation of these superordinate goals, they tend to reduce intergroup conflict, and collaborative solutions and negotiations tend to yield better outcomes for both sides versus something that looks more like control or dominance or just avoidance generally. So business strategy and development and implementation is expressed through an integrated communication and leadership approach, although it's never immediately obvious that any particular strategy or approach is not, it doesn't have the, or doesn't carry the risk of creating more problems than just maintaining the original status quo. So there's also a growing strong body of evidence supporting the improved levels of commitment and the results from transformational leadership approaches. There's also evidence, so there's also evidence that transformational leaders tend to also use the active portions of transactional leadership as part of their integrated strategy that looks like something like management by exception or a couple other things like that. So they're not, you don't see a lot of this purist type approach. So transactional leadership behaviors are aimed at monitoring and controlling employees through something like rational means or economic means. And there's an interesting study examining transformational versus transactional leadership in a virtual team setting, and they found that groups working with a transactional leader actually had higher levels of group efficiency and task satisfaction than the groups that were working with the transformational leader. But that was only the case when the individual inputs of the contributors were actually identified. That advantage disappeared as soon as you made everything anonymous. So an interesting find is that neither of these leadership styles consistently outperform the other. So my thoughts are that it's possibly because the aspects of both leadership styles are actually important depending on the contextual details of that particular situation. So change models. All the change models at an abstract level have a sort of identical metaphorical structure, something that looks like unbearable present and desired future and some kind of mediating process between the two. And there's really only slight variation in their particular description for each of the abstract constructs, and it's usually it's something that looks like it's designed for a particular domain or some kind of change. So the Cotter, Lewin, and McKinsey 7S and ADKAR models are 4 examples of change leadership models that can be applied to achieve sustainable organizational objectives. So the Cotter change model is it's a bit of a circular change process where the vision, sort of a vision-guided outcome, is continuously reassessed as the goals and strategies evolve over time. The Lewin change model is expressed more of as an episodic change, where it's sort of in the sense that it's a linear process that is infrequent and discontinuous and intentional. It's more leader-centric in that sense. The McKinsey 7S model is a sort of higher level systems approach to change, where all the functions of the organization are moved in lockstep with each other. And the ADKAR model takes a sort of fractionated approach that actually allows it to be a sort of diagnostic tool during the change process. So it lets change leaders sort of pick apart particular steps and focus on those and that are directly related to the specific change goals. So many techniques have been developed over time as reasonable templates and models to simplify some of the difficult market sense-making exercises. And some of these strategies are applicable both internally and externally. So on the internal side, there's things like scenario planning and critical success factors, or KPIs, and those have been used relatively successfully Scenario planning is the one thing with that is it's particularly sensitive to the assumptions that are made up at upfront as to what's going to actually stay static across time. So, or exactly how things are going to change into the future. So you have to be really careful about how you select and manipulate these variables, because that's going to be key to your successful prediction. So with the critical success factors and indicators, they can revolve around a variety of activities. So that includes plans and processes, or people, authority, and risks. And the intent is to attempt to consolidate various relatively arbitrary considerations into simplified indicators that can serve as proxy for likelihood of success. So on the external side, we've got the SWOT and PESTLE and the 5 forces models that have been used to look at the external market opportunities. So, but similarly, so some of these models you can use also for internal work. So the strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat, or the SWOT model, allows for the development of a high-level summary of primary considerations for organizations to communicate strategy through their company reports. And you'll find that sort of many publicly traded organizations they'll include a SWOT analysis as part of their annual reports to investors, so they know where they're going. The political, so the PESTLE one, which sometimes is referred, it doesn't have the E occasionally. The political, it's a political, economic, social, technological, and environmental analysis. So that gives some insight into the factors that are at play in a particular market. So it's basically like a SWOT analysis, but it's much more tailored and much more specific to something like a market frame. So it takes that sort of frame of reference, and it attempts to be a bit more comprehensive about that environment specifically. So the last one, the 5 forces model, takes a more broad industrial economics approach to analyzing the existing competitive market environment. So that includes the potential entrants and existing competitors and buyers and suppliers and substitute products or services that might be there. So in conclusion, the development of the parameters for analysis for any of these strategies, whether they're internal or external, they need to include an underlying ethical or sustainable substructure. And any strategy that directly approaches hard metrics, it's bound to have holes in it that can be hacked with unethical practices and unethical execution. So leaders need to be really constantly aware of the opportunities and the risks that are laid out in front of them, and they need to be really clear about the superordinate goals that they're using as guiding principles for their decisions and communicate those effectively. So that can be delegated as far down the chain as you can take it. On the business side, organizations really survive by being aware of where their weaknesses are and the opportunities that are laid out in front of them. And then also for changes, before any changes in an organization are attempted, leaders need to be really aware of the tradition that got them or got the organization and them to where they are, where it is, and why it's been that way and why it was successful so far. So the generation of new metrics and attaching performance management systems to these new changes they do and they can create behavioral change in an organization, but there's also side effects of the change, right? So those need to be accounted for as well. So in a sense, I suppose it's much easier to go downhill in a change than it is to go uphill, right? So it might actually diffuse into something that you don't actually necessarily want to happen. So I think a refocus on the understanding of the organizational ethos and the establishment of, and maybe the process is something like the establishment of near-term superordinate goals, and maybe that's the way to approach it. And I think that's a good benefit to study some more later on. Okay, bye bye.